Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. You've almost made it. It's been a long day, and I'm sure you learned a lot about a number of things. And this is your last talk before we wrap up in the after party. I moved to Perth about a year ago now, and I'm really happy to be here. I've loved the beaches and the sunshine and the coffee, and I've really loved being welcomed into this warm tech community here. You have a wonderful gem of a community, which is symbolized by this giant gem we have on the stage. Have you ever had a time when you or someone on your team comes back from a conference, much like this one, and says to the team, I just learned about this brand new technology, and it is going to solve all of our problems, it is going to change the way we do things, and we should use it on our next project. And so you get buy-in from the team, everyone's excited about learning something new, and you get buy-in from the stakeholders because they want to hear that we're going to improve efficiency, this is going to cost less over time, we're going to have much more innovation, and so they buy in too. And then you start getting to work on your project, and you start to realize that it's a little bit harder than you expected. It's not quite as easy as the demo that you saw at the conference. But you keep moving forward, and slowly, deadlines start to creep up, and complexities start to arise. Like, you didn't think about how we would deploy this new language and this new application that we were building, or we didn't think about how we would build in monitoring to it as well. And you start to hit some different types of bugs than you're used to dealing with, and it gets very stressful. And you think to yourself, what happened? I thought this was going to be easy and improve everything. I'm going to talk to you a bit about how to approach new technologies in a way that's a little bit more thoughtful and a little less stressful. But before I start, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. Without these sponsors, we wouldn't be here today and be able to afford such a lovely conference. It's been a wonderful day so far due to all of these contributions. And I'd also like to make a shout out to the conference organizers who've done a wonderful job. It is a lot of work to run a conference, and it's been wonderful to be here. So today what I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk a bit about my experience and some lessons that I've learned throughout my time in software engineering. Then I'm going to talk about some questions we can ask ourselves about whether a new technology is the right one to adopt. And finally, I'm going to talk about if we do choose to adopt this new technology, what are some approaches that we can take? So first, a lot of times you hear the phrase, it's okay to make mistakes, but it's not a good idea to make the same mistake twice. And while I can say that I haven't generally made the exact same mistake twice, there are some mistakes where you have to see them from a couple different angles before you understand that there's a pattern here and there's a better way to approach things. So I'm going to walk you through a few experiences that I've had and the lessons that I've learned the hard way so that you don't have to. So going back to 2008, this is when I began my career as a software engineer, and I was in my first role at a company called DRW Trading Group in Chicago. It was a financial trading firm and had a small software department, and we were building applications for the traders. Generally, and we were tasked with building a new application that would aggregate all the trades across the company and display them in real time. Until this time, DRW had only manual software testers, QA testers, and this had been working pretty well. But there were some challenges that were starting to arise, and those were manual testing is tedious, and there's human error involved, and if the testers find a problem with the software that you built, you're not exactly sure where to even look in the code. And so that's why everyone was excited about unit testing. We don't need this slower manual test process. We can just automate our code and test it at a more granular level. And we can run these tests automatically. We'll know exactly where our code breaks, when it breaks, and this will solve our problem of the slow manual testing. So we went bananas, and we wrote unit tests covering all of our application. We had a high test coverage. We had a CTO who bought these little orbs that would turn green or red whether you broke the build, and everyone got very excited about it. And this all went well. We were pretty happy with the quality of our app that we released. But then a few months later, our business analyst came to us and said, we actually need this application to do something a bit different. It's going to need to generate these dashboards for all of the different trading desks across the firm. And then we looked at the code, and we realized we're going to have to do quite a bit of refactoring. Our application doesn't work like this, and if we have to refactor it, we're going to have to rewrite all of these unit tests that we built. And at the same time, when we are rewriting these tests, how will we know the application still worked the way that it was intended to? We suddenly started regretting not having a more end-to-end, higher-level focus of testing on the application. And the lesson that we learned here was testing methods are trade-offs. We got so excited about jumping into unit testing, and that would be our quality assurance framework. We didn't realize that there's a trade-off we're making here. Unit testing is fantastic. I still use it on a daily basis with all of my teams. But I have realized over time that it does make refactoring more challenging. It does make having an end-to-end perspective on your software more challenging. And so it would have been more helpful if we had stepped back and not gotten so excited about just using unit testing. So a few years later, the next thing that everyone was excited about at DRW was polyglot programming. Why use the same language across all of the applications at your company when you can use the one that best fits the job at hand? And we were tasked then with building a web application, and so one of the senior developers turned to the team and said, we should use Ruby on Rails for this. Ruby on Rails is the next big thing for web applications and allows us to spin it up easily. And so we did. And everyone was happy with that. We had a Ruby application that was working well for the web app that we were building. And then a little further down the line, we had to build a highly concurrent application, a backend web server that was handling many requests. And somebody brought up, another one of the senior engineers brought up, we should use functional programming and Clojure for this, because that is the next big thing for handling all this concurrency in a much easier way. So we ramped up on Clojure, a little more of a learning curve than Ruby, and we wrote our server in Clojure. And that was fun. It's great to learn new things as a junior engineer, and so I enjoyed it. But then a few months later, we started getting bugs requested to be fixed for our legacy C# applications. We had new feature requests for our Ruby on Rails web application, and we were still developing this new service in Clojure. There were days when we would context switch across all three within one day. And so that's when we realized that having new languages is a trade-off. Polyglot is a trade-off. What you gain in the small improvements in certain ways that languages bring us, we were definitely losing in the context switching and the bugs that were introduced because no one could really remember exactly the syntax and exactly the things we were using for that language. And so, again, we learned this lesson. And you'd think that maybe by now I would really understand this a bit better, but no, I wasn't quite sure how to handle this particular situation. Because my next role in 2015, and one that a lot of people can relate to, the hot new paradigm was microservices. Everyone was tired of building monoliths. We'd seen a lot of pain with monolithic development. And so I started a new role at an enterprise software startup called Outpace. And it was brand new. I was one of the first 8 developers. And our tech lead and CTO said, we are building microservices. We didn't know what we were building. We didn't know who we were building it for. We were just getting going, but we were building microservices. And so we were all excited. We heard great things about microservices. But within the first 6 months, we had written and we're running about 15 to 20 services. And there were only 8 of us, and we were on one team. And we were running all of these locally just to spin up our environment. And so our machines were running hot. Our ability to debug across all of these services was really challenging. And so we learned that microservices was not going to solve our problems. It was not the answer that we were looking for. Microservices architecture is also a trade-off. And there are advantages. There are great advantages to microservices, being able to scale each service independently and develop and deploy each service independently. But there are a lot of challenges with managing that many services, especially across a small team. And so I've actually seen this challenge with microservices in a number of different organizations. There's this feeling that this is how we have to build things now, but it does not always pay off for every type of situation. So finally, I was in my first role as an engineering manager, and we were tasked, this was at Cornerstone, and we were tasked with building a new web application that allowed our customers to build quizzes and tests for their clients who were consuming all of our learning content, just making sure they were understanding it and competent in the things that they were learning. There was no mystery to this application. It was very basic CRUD. You just had to be able to build questions, build tests, assess the users on those things. And the senior engineer on my team at the time said, we need to use GraphQL. We have to build a web app here. We have to build a mobile app. We have different front ends. We can query just the data we need and make this specific without building any BFFs or anything like that. And it sounded pretty great. So at this point, I had learned a little bit about some questions to ask ahead of time, and I said, this is something new. We have not used GraphQL here before. Are you sure? I want you to think about this a little bit. But he assured me and said, I've been reading and studying a lot about GraphQL. I know this is the answer. It will make things easier for us. So we moved forward with GraphQL. And the first thing we realized is there's a big learning curve for GraphQL. You have to define the schemas and the queries, and it's a different paradigm than we were used to using with REST. But it was fun. The team enjoyed learning it. The deadlines were ticking closer a little bit, made us a little bit nervous. And at some point, I said, are we sure? We've gotten this far, but it's still going to take us quite a while to wrap our heads around this. Are we sure we want to move forward? And the team said, yes, we've already come this far. We've already spent this time learning. Why would we stop now? So we ended up getting the project finished, and it was beyond our planned timeline, as you could imagine. And then at the end, we were told, we need to expose this as part of our public API. And that was the final lesson that we learned, is that our public API was entirely in REST, and there was not a lot of appetite at the time because GraphQL was so new for our customers to be using it. And so we ended up having to write the REST version anyways. So the final lesson that I learned is a new API paradigm is also a trade-off. There are some wins. We only had to make single queries to our backend instead of many REST queries, and we only retrieved the data we needed. But at the end of the day, the challenges outweighed those risks and didn't quite make it worth it. So, if you didn't already figure this one out, the moral of the story here is that every decision is a trade-off. We get really hung up with new technologies, especially with the excitement that comes with shiny new things, about thinking that the newer thing is going to solve our problem. But with every technology choice, there are some advantages and there are some costs. And if you dive in without considering the cost first, then you're in for some pain when they show up later. So in order to avoid this pain, I'd next like to walk you through 6 questions you can ask yourself and ask the team before proceeding forward in order to help frame your decision about whether to use this new technology. The first one is, does this new technology align to our actual requirements? This may seem quite intuitive and quite obvious, but a lot of times we learn something new and kind of try to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. This new thing seems really exciting, and it seems like we have this hammer, and everything is a nail, and this is a great idea to use for any project. But that is not always the case, as I've learned with my previous examples. So what exactly do you need in terms of performance, in terms of features, and do they align to does this new technology actually align? The next thing to think about is, what are your team's competencies? Do you have a really senior team where they may have used this technology before at a previous role and put it in production, or very familiar with it? Or do you have a junior team who's just read some blog posts or seen a talk at a conference and is not quite ready to take on something brand new? The next thing to think about is, How mature is the new technology that you are thinking about? Um, Where on the adoption curve would you be if you decide to adopt this at this point? Are you an early adopter, in which case there's not a lot of information out on Stack Overflow. ChatGPT can't give you the answers that you need. So it'll take a lot of time to work through some of the issues. If you want to wait a little bit more toward the middle of the curve, there will already be some answers out there, and it'll be a little more helpful for you to be able to adopt this within your team. The next thing to ask yourself is, how aligned is our tech stack? Is someone asking to use a brand new Azure service when the entire app is built on AWS right now? Is this a new type of database that we're not familiar with deploying and managing? Or does it fit quite well into what we're doing? Like, we're already on AWS, but we just want to start serverless and start using Lambdas and see how that goes. Another thing to think about is this a good time to take a risk? Risks are not inherently bad. It's great for everyone to take risks, and that's how we innovate and we find new solutions to things. But there are times when it might be a bit too much. For example, if you have a team that's been running pretty smoothly for quite a while, not managing anything new at this time, the morale might be kind of low, and it might be a great time to take a risk and do something a little bit new to challenge people. However, if you have a team that isn't well formed, maybe 3 new members just joined, and you're getting a lot of bugs that you have to work through, there's a little bit of stress on the team, it might not be a good time yet to adopt a brand new technology and try to weave that into your existing environment. The final question I have is, how much will this cost to scale? So, as many of you know, there's a huge difference between working on something locally, building a proof of concept, and getting it actually deployed to production and running it. And there's potential that you'll need to involve other resources, your DevOps team, figure out how to deploy and monitor this new solution. And then there's the financial, literal cost of your AWS bill could potentially go through the roof if you're not careful and aware of what the costs are. So take a little time to cost out where this would be at once you get it to scale. So to summarize, ensure that you've talked about the project requirements and whether they align to the technology that you're adopting. Next, consider your team competencies. And is this team ready to take on something new? Do they have familiarity with it? Or will it be something brand new? Next, consider the technology maturity. Has this tech been around for a little while? Are there answers out there that you need for the problems that you're trying to solve? If this person or the team left the company today, would you be able to hire new people into those roles that would be familiar with this technology? Next is tech stack alignment, and does this technology align to your current tech stack, or would it be a leap? Then your risk profile is now a good time to be taking a risk. And finally, the cost to scale. What is the actual cost in terms of resources and money that it will take to get this into production? Now, there is no right answer here. I'm definitely not here to say avoid new technologies, avoid new paradigms. But it's worth considering, now that you've been thoughtful about this, you're able to more consider the trade-offs that you're making. And so, for example, if the project requirements seem to align well to this technology, but it's really early on in the tech maturity, we're not sure about we'll be able to get the answers and debug our issues, and we're already taking on a lot of risk in other areas, then that might be a time to slow down and not adopt it. However, if it's not quite aligned to your current tech stack, but you have a strong team who's familiar with it from their previous roles, and it's a mature technology, it won't cost too much to scale, then that might be a good time to take that kind of risk. So once you make this decision, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is 5 steps to set you up for success when you go to adopt this new technology. And before I go into this, I want to say something about, in case you decide not to, you decide to pause, and we're not ready to adopt something like this currently. A great solution for your team in order to continue to empower them to learn and grow is to have a hackathon. Hackathons are a great opportunity to give the team a few days to experiment with something new without impacting your product timelines or ongoing product work. So, to set yourself up for success, the first thing you need to do is to set expectations with yourself, with the team, and with your stakeholders. This is one of the biggest things that people tend to miss when adopting a new technology or diving into something new. There are going to be costs involved. You're going to need to do some learning. You're going to need to potentially set up some new deployment pipelines, talk to some people across the organization, make sure you're in good shape for this. This takes time, and if we just dive in assuming that we can just get going right from the start and jump into development, then we will be suffering later on in the project. So take the time to think through the extra space that you need in order to succeed and set expectations appropriately. The next important thing is to ramp up the team. So a lot of times you have someone super senior who's really excited about this technology. Maybe they've been working on a side project for a little while, and they really get it. But if the rest of the team feels behind, it's going to be very stressful, and it's not going to lead to success. So think about, without diving right into the project you're working on, how can you bring the team together in order to ramp up and learn together? And there are great online courses. You could do a short project together, do some pairing, just get everyone really familiar with the technology so they don't run into challenges and bugs too early in the process, and everyone can enjoy it. It's a great team bonding experience. Next important thing is to start small. Unlike my CTO, who just mandated microservices across the organization, maybe try one service. Maybe try as small of a piece of the code or the project that you can break off and trial something new is a great way to get going. You lower your risk, and you lower the stress that's involved with taking that risk. You've heard this before, and I'm going to say it again. It's very important to fail fast. When I was working on GraphQL, we got stuck in the sunk cost fallacy of thinking, we worked on this already for a month. We've been learning this and putting it into learning this and figuring a lot out about it. And all of that would be wasted if we just stopped now. So we've got to keep going. And that is generally not the case. If you're struggling and you realize it's not the right time, or this isn't going to work out, now is the time to stop and reassess. It is not a failure, it's a learning it is a failure, but it's not that it's not successful. Learning is successful always. Finally, a very critical thing is to share your learnings. A lot of times when we fail with something, we have the tendency to want to hide that or step back from it a little bit. But that's really unfortunate because sharing failure has a couple of advantages. First, it prevents other people across your organization from hitting the same issues and failing in the same way. And it also helps normalize failure. We're all failing all the time, but we tend to only want to share our successes. And so sharing failure makes it very valuable. And if you succeed, and you've started small, you now have a template for the rest of the organization to adopt the same technology, and that's very valuable to share as well. So to recap, in order to have smooth sailing, the best first thing is to set expectations, ramp up the team, start small, fail fast, and share your learnings. And in this way, you will be setting yourself up for success with new technologies. You will fail many times, but you will not suffer while you're failing because you know that you've set expectations appropriately, and it will cause a lot less stress along the way. And finally, a happy animal, my favorite animal in Western Australia. You'll be like this quokka. You'll have a much more enjoyable experience adopting a new technology. Throughout your career, if you're lucky, you are going to learn a lot. In fact, the goal is to always be learning. And if you're always learning, you're going to be failing quite a bit. And so if you know how to fail and learn without the extreme stress and anxiety of deadlines that you know you're going to miss, and fear of failure with adopting new technologies, it's not going to be a fun experience, and it's going to be a pretty bumpy ride. But if you follow this framework, and you start small, and you fail fast, and you share your learnings, you'll have an enjoyable ride throughout your career. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We have time for questions. Does anyone have anything?
What's your thoughts on American versus Australian work culture?
That's a great question. So I've been in Australia for a year, and I've only recently started my first Australian role at Go1. So far, I have not found there to be a huge difference. It's been wonderful and very much aligned to what I'm used to, although it's one company, and so I can't really weight the differences very much yet. In general, the vibe I've been getting is that there's just a much more relaxed feel here, and that's really actually made me much more excited about this conference, about presenting, and it's a really great cultural attitude to have, because when you're too stressed, it's really difficult to learn. I've actually been quite terrified of failure for most of my junior career, and because of that, I haven't been as open to learning as I think I could have. So a relaxed atmosphere is great.
No? Oh, of course. Can I throw it?
I thought I would follow on from that other question because it was a good one. What advantages could you call out in your short experience comparing the Australian to the US work culture? What advantages do you think there might be to the US work culture? You know, perhaps being more intense and the work ethic having a different flavor, for example?
There is something about the sense of urgency. A lot of us need a bit of a sense of urgency. So I've definitely, with software development, there's always been a trade-off between the business setting deadlines for you and saying we need this by this point, or having the software team estimate how long it will take to accomplish something and going with those estimates. Or just the third path of, here's the user stories, just let us know when they're finished. And without any sense of urgency, will take forever. Engineers always want things to be perfect, and there's a tendency to over-engineer, and so that's a really healthy balance to have, a little bit of pressure. And it's interesting because even with Go1, we actually have a team of developers in Paris, and the Paris work culture is more relaxed than the Perth and Australia work culture, and that has caused some challenges for us too. I mean, the time zone is also a big challenge, I'm not going to lie, but just with the fact that you expect someone to be accountable, they say they're going to finish something, and then the next day it's just like, no, I didn't really get finished. And you rely on people, we all rely on each other, and so having some pressure there is important.
Okay.
There's one right there.
I see. I'm also, while I'm on my way over, going to spruik I keep going to call it a playbook, yearbook. There's a yearbook that you can get from the registration desks, which is celebrating the 10 years that this conference has been running. So if you want to be able to go back and see what's happened and celebrate with us, then you should grab it.
Thanks for walking all the way back over here. I was curious if you've learnt anything in your experience so far about, I think you gave an example where you have a very senior developer who's very excited about a technology, and they give you lots of assurance that they know exactly what they're doing and it's going to be great. If you have any tips or advice on, more than you can ask for than just their assurance.
Yes, that's a great point. If you're not confident, a few ideas are, like I mentioned about the hackathon, or just a spike within the team and just say, Why don't you build a proof of concept and show how this is going to work? And a lot of times, an idea of something and then actually working to build the proof of concept is enough to make them step back and say, maybe we're not quite ready on the team. Also, just time box it. Like I said about failing fast, you might say, we're going to go in this direction, but in 2 weeks or a month or whatever your time frame is, we're going to have a retro and decide at that point whether we want to move forward with the sunk cost fallacy in mind, saying, we talked about this, we knew we were going to have this retro and make this decision again at this point, so that everyone feels comfortable failing fast and just moving forward from that experience. Yes, that does happen all the time.